Welcome to Money Market, a Bank of Tampa podcast. We highlight the businesses, expert business advice, the local economy, and points of interest in the Tampa Bay market. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And please share this episode with a friend or colleague. I am your host, Owen LaFave, the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa, Tampa Bay's oldest and largest community bank. Our guest today, when he's not running St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida, he's out training to run in the St. Anthony's Triathlon. And I imagine biking and swimming too, I guess. He has over 30 years experience in the healthcare arena. He was instrumental in constructing, opening, and operating BayCare's St. Joseph's Hospital South in Riverview. And now he is the president of St. Anthony's in downtown St. Pete. We're delighted to have him in our community. Scott Smith, welcome to Money Market.
Thank you, Owen. It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate you having me here.
I appreciate you being here. So tell us about St. Anthony's Hospital.
You know, St. Anthony's is a tremendous story. It's a wonderful story, one that I love telling. It started originally in 1921 as Faith Hospital.
In its current location?
In its current location. Amazing. And then it was purchased in 1931 by the Franciscan Sisters of Alleghany, and that really started its history as St. Anthony's Hospital. So they acquired in 1931 and then set about their very first construction project. And the original acquisition price was $40,000. So if you can imagine buying a hospital for $40,000, the Franciscan Sisters did it in 1931. They then set about on their first construction project, which was the construction of what is now the East Tower. It's still in operation today. It was brought online in 1937. The cost of that building was $240,000 in 1937.
A little different than your new tower, right?
A little bit different than the new tower. So imagine constructing a new hospital for $240,000. And that really began the sisters' legacy of service to the St. Petersburg community. And they really were there to serve the needs of the community, to serve all of those who were in the community. And they were foundational in running and operating that hospital all the way up until 1997.
Gosh, almost 100 years.
Yeah. Up until 97, which was the foundation of BayCare, and they were one of the original members of BayCare.
Let's talk about BayCare. So, what is BayCare? How big is BayCare now?
You know, BayCare is one of the largest health systems in West Central Florida. It is a total of 16 hospitals, over 4,000 inpatient beds, 16 hospitals in 4 counties, a $5.5 billion net revenue, operating revenue organization. Just a tremendous organization here serving West Central Florida primarily through 4 counties, through those 16 hospitals, and then a number of physician practices, over 800 physicians employed, wow. Over 32,000 team members employed, over $10 billion in total economic impact.
Incredible.
About 180 physician practice locations, multiple urgent cares, freestanding ambulatory surgery centers, outpatient imaging centers, really providing the full breadth of services here to West Central Florida.
And I feel like, with a tremendous amount of growth over the past 15 years, 2 decades. Is that fair to say?
It really has. And that's been a combination of growth within the original communities that were served, and then also through expansion, I would say strategic expansion through a lot of those ambulatory services. You mentioned St. Joe South, through opening new hospitals, St. Joe's North, St. Joe South, Wesley Chapel Hospital, acquisition of hospitals in Bartow and Winter Haven, and now with planned hospitals opening in Manatee County as well. So we continue to expand that footprint and continue to expand our services to West Central Florida.
Well, when we talk about expansion, so St. Anthony's, you just recently led them through the construction of a new tower, additional 90 beds, correct?
That's correct.
Cost a little more than $200,000?
Cost a little more than $200,000. That was about a $150 million project. And I will tell you that really was only the second phase of a full master facility plan. So I arrived at St. Anthony's in 2016, and we really launched the first phase of that master facility plan in 2016. The first phase was primarily OR expansion, as well as some internal departmental reconfigurations. The second phase, really, the landmark was that new tower, but it also included a lot of other departmental relocations and renovations to allow us to better serve the needs of that new 90-bed tower that's coming online. And now the final phase, which is underway currently, is an ER expansion, as well as some imaging expansion as well.
Now, what's the timing of those?
ER expansion will be completed by the end of this year, so that we're excited about having that fully operational. It has come online, a portion of it has come online already, which is the opening of a new pod for that emergency department. It's an additional 13-bed unit, which is also both a behavioral health, it's a behavioral health and general medical unit, and they're kind of hybrid rooms. It's a unique approach that both ACA and the state have really recognized as best practice, so a way for us to continue to serve the community. But there are 2 additional internal phases for that project, which will be online at the end of the year. We're currently relocating and replacing 2 MRI machines, 2 magnetic imaging, resonance imaging machines, and that will be online in the first quarter of 25.
Okay. Now, you were instrumental in the construction of St. Joe South. Was that your first construction experience? Did you have prior experience?
I'll tell you, as being a hospital administrator, you're always involved in construction projects. I'll tell you, prior to my time with BayCare, I felt like I was always in health systems and in hospitals that were competing with the shiny new hospital down the road. St. Joe South was my first opportunity to participate in a greenfield hospital, which is essentially a brand new hospital, a brand new opening, brand new start. It's something that not many people get the opportunity to participate in. Just an incredibly amazing experience professionally. Again, recognizing that not many people get that experience, and at the end of the day, delivering an incredible product to that community. Yeah,
it really is. So, how did that experience prepare you for the tower at St. Anthony's?
It's interesting. Some of the architects that were on record for the St. Joe South were also the architects on record for the tower expansion. So we had really good working relationships. So it made it, pretty fluid, pretty seamless. So we were able to really talk more conceptually about, what were design elements that we really liked, what could we replicate. The challenge is, how do you build brand new on top of existing? That was building essentially a new hospital on top of an existing hospital.
Sure, yeah.
So that created some of its own construction challenges and design challenges.
So anything that was truly a surprise that no one was prepared for?
It's interesting. I'll tell you what the big surprise was a pandemic. I don't know if you recall, you and I both were at a chamber meeting. We actually had it at St. Anthony's Hospital in the boardroom.
Yeah.
And that was in March of 2020. And it was 1 week before our first COVID patient. So we're embarking on this, and the world changed dramatically after that. So here we are embarking on, a very large construction project in 2020, and we ended up completing that project ahead of schedule and under budget. So if you think about the disruptions of the pandemic and you hear about all the construction challenges that people faced downstream from some of the pandemic, to have gone through that project under budget and ahead of schedule was very fulfilling.
Great feather in your cap. I mean, that's challenging. And it's interesting, if you're familiar with the construction process, you'd think like, okay, given the timing in which you were starting, the project would have been bought out. However, what we all seem to kind of forget during that time frame too, which is why it's impressive, is that the supply chain changed. You couldn't get things. If you could get them in the time that you wanted, you had to overpay for it. Right. But to come in on time and under budget is really incredible accomplishment.
And a lot of that was pre-purchasing. Again, a lot of the supply chain disruptions were not in place, so we pre-purchased as many materials as we could on the front end, and that's really what enabled that.
Well, I mean, great foresight to be able to pull that off. So congratulations. What are your responsibilities as president? I think people would be curious, like what does your day-to-day look like?
My responsibility as president of St. Anthony's Hospital is really, I am ultimately responsible for the overall performance of St. Anthony's to BayCare. The entire operation of the facility. But I would also say equally as important is I carry an ambassador role in the local community as a business leader in the local community, to have relationships with the city, to have relationships with the business leaders throughout Southern Pinellas, to develop those networks and to establish the trusting relationship that we already enjoy in Southern St. Pete and in Southern Pinellas. But I would also say say, it's kind of a vertical ambassadorship. I also am an ambassador back to BayCare for the interest of the team members in the local market to provide surveillance back to the health system on what's developing and what the dynamics in the local market are. So responsible for the overall performance, but then really kind of a dual role for being an ambassador both externally and internally.
Well, you do a heck of a job because, you are very visible. You're a great ambassador. You're a great partner to the community, a big employer in the community. So thank you for being part of St. Pete and the South Pinellas market. From an organizational structure, is that something that you have some influence on at St. Anthony's? Is that BayCare driven? Is it a combination of both?
I will say it's a combination of both. It's been a little bit of an organic growth period. And if you look at BayCare, and it's one of the benefits of being a regionally based health system, we have the benefit of really leveraging our economies of scale. So if you look at our overall organizational structure, we'll replicate that across multiple hospitals throughout the health system, where I'm the local hospital president. But there will be local directors who are responsible, and they're usually divided between clinical and support functions inside of the hospital. But there's also regional and system directors. So, for example, there's not a local director of, say, imaging services. There's a manager of imaging services, but there's a regional director for imaging that's over, say, 5 hospitals.
Okay.
We have a regional director for environmental services that's over all 16 hospitals. And that really drives a lot of standardization and consistency,
Sure.
as you can imagine, and efficiency, so that we're not doing things, in one manner in one location, in a different manner in another location. So we have a combination of both regional and system directors, and we have local directors. And then we have a chief medical officer who's responsible for medical staff relationships, medical staff governance, and myself as the president at the local level.
So does that hybrid kind of, local within the hospital, regional, also apply to the departments and the various units within the hospital as well?
It does, where every department will report up through a director, and that director could be a local director or a regional director. I will tell you, on the patient care side, on the nursing side, those are going to be local directors. Okay. On the surgical side, that's going to be a local director. And where you can imagine having better economies of scale on the facilities front, on the securities front, things of that nature, that might point to a system director or a regional director.
Okay, interesting. How challenging is staffing in today's environment? Because we keep hearing about all the shortages, and how are you addressing that?
It's interesting. I will say that staffing challenges have been through a number of different life cycles. If you go back to pre-pandemic, the world was fairly stable. We had a waiting line of people that, wanted to get into BayCare as a health system. We still do have a waiting line of people that want to get into BayCare, the health system, because they know the brand, they know the reputation. They hear from their colleagues as to what a great organization that it is.
Embarrassment of riches right there. Not everybody's that fortunate, Scott.
The pandemic changed everything.
Okay.
You had a lot of people that migrated out to go travel, and they could have had their own personal issues that drove that. But there were a lot of things. A lot of people got tired and exited. A lot of people got burned out. There was a huge, I believe, heroic push on the front end for everyone to engage, embrace arms, and roll up their sleeves and really get through this. A year in, 18 months in, 24 months in, there was a little bit of attrition through that. What we're seeing now is more of a return to stability, and we've done so through a number of avenues. We've really reduced and minimized the number of contract travelers that we have throughout the health system. I would say it is really kind of minimized almost to pre-pandemic levels, not quite, but almost to pre-pandemic levels.
Does that help kind of standardize care too?
It does. And one thing that we did, and it was part of the health system being creative, and one of the benefits of having a large health system, is we kind of created our own kind of resource pool that says, instead of going out and paying a third party for travelers, let's create our own kind of contracting labor pool. And even if there's a premium associated with it, they're our own team members. They're invested on who we are. They're invested in our culture. They're invested in our organization. And we can then move them around the health system and be a lot more flexible and reduce that overall expense. We're seeing even more of that return to normal. And I'll tell you, as I go through new employee orientations, the room's full. on a biweekly basis, and it's encouraging and surprising to see. But I'll tell you, the culture of the labor force did change throughout the pandemic.
Really interesting. That model, is that something that other hospital systems have utilized as well? Was that something that was unique to BayCare to implement?
I think to varying degrees they have. I think we've executed very well and executed to an extent that's allowed us to eliminate a lot of that contract labor, again, to bring that premium down. And I would say that many others have replicated that to varying degrees, but I believe that we were very successful in doing so.
Well, I think that, that kind of going back to the kind of the standard of care and the high standard of care, I think that helps execute on that strategy. But I mean, what are some other things that BayCare does, St. Anthony does to ensure that you're maintaining that level of care?
It's interesting because you speak to what is at our core value. If you were to go, and this is, irrelevant to pandemic, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, what's BayCare known for? And it's being driven by quality. It's being driven by a continuous improvement model. It's being driven by comparing ourselves and benchmarking ourselves with the best. It's being driven by creating the highest standards of care that we can possibly deliver, and then improving on that on an ongoing basis.
Okay, so always striving to get better.
And I would say that we compare and stack up. We're nationally recognized. We're one of the best health systems from a quality perspective in the entire country, in the entire state. We're recognized, have many awards for that recognition as well as our culture as a great place to work.
Now, I guess that striving for excellence and continuous improvement just kind of naturally leads itself to ensure that you're keeping the accreditation and the licensing that you need to continue to operate and
Absolutely. And, licensure and accreditation, there are elements that are required. You don't get to participate in federally funded programs, Medicare, Medicaid services, if you're not accredited through either Joint Commission or DNV. So that type of accreditation, everybody plays along those rules. We look at our participation in other registries and in other specialty certifications to really differentiate ourselves, and not even so much just for that differentiation, but to ensure that we are striving for the highest quality, so that we're striving towards being the best of the best in each one of the disciplines where we are comparing, whether that's through Commission on Cancer, whether that's through cardiology registries, where we're recognized as having one of the best cardiology programs in the entire state, 3 hospitals who are 3 stars, which are the highest rating that you can get from that particular rating agency, one of the few health systems that has all of its open heart programs registered at that level. So that type of recognition you only get through that external benchmarking. And so we will pursue those when we know that it drives our quality higher.
Okay. Well, and by the way, congratulations on all of those. I mean, all great achievements and recognition of the great work that you do. Is it fair to say the main source of revenue at a hospital is the OR? Is that kind of standard?
It's interesting. And I would say revenue comes in a couple of different kind of scenarios. So it's where is it coming from? Who's funding it? And that's where I would say the majority is coming through Medicare, Medicaid. And most hospitals will fall along those lines as well. I'd say, over 50% Medicare, probably 10% Medicaid. You'll get, roughly 25% on the commercial payer front. So those are your funding sources. So you'll have a dominant kind of funding source. But then on the overall revenue component, ORs, yes, procedural areas in general. I would say any procedural area, a lot of outpatient areas, people will frequently think that, all your revenue is coming from the inpatient area. And that's generally not the case. It's a balance between all of those elements of care.
Okay. I mean, and I feel like I've heard, and, not being in the industry, but I mean, the goal is to, get people in and get people out, right? I mean, it costs more money for the inpatient care.
And that's a component of the reimbursement mechanism. For most payers and through most governmental programs, we get paid for an episode of care. So Owen LaFave comes in to St. Anthony's Hospital for a surgery procedure. We get paid the same amount of money whether you stay 2 days or you stay 6 days.
Okay.
So all we're doing is increasing expenses the longer that you stay. But if you go back to our clinical excellence model, we're not going to discharge you just to get you out the door. We're going to make sure that those clinical practices also coincide with best practice. What's interesting is when we benchmark ourselves on some of those clinical benchmarks, sometimes patients do better going home sooner. than staying later. So it's really kind of relying on.
Is that because of a risk of infection, or
there's risks of all kinds of things that can occur. You're outside of your normal environment. You're not normalizing the way that you could, that you normally would. If you're comfortable in a bed and you've got somebody that can meet your needs, you're less likely to get up and walk around the house and ambulate on your own. So there's a lot of factors there. And that's where we really have to rely on our clinical teams and our clinical experts and external benchmarking. And what industry best practice is where should we be? And then how do we measure our outcomes against what those best practices are?
Well, I will tell you, I'm a terrible patient. So I was sent home, and any opportunity that I had with my wife not in the room, I was trying to be mobile and not stay in bed, not stay on the couch. So, I guess to each their own. But in terms of, just seems like there's a proliferation of outpatient centers. And I don't know if it's a function of reducing costs or just being more convenient in terms of geography, maybe a combination of both. But what's happened in the industry that has facilitated that?
I would say a couple of things. Part of it is a payer dynamic. If you look at it, that tends to be a lower cost location to provide care. So a lot of payers want to migrate in that direction. The more experience we get in that arena, the more we realize that we can provide safe care in that environment. So you get a combination of lower cost, safe care, good outcomes, and the payers tend to follow that as well. And so that's one reason that you see a proliferation in those particular arenas.
Another question maybe along those lines of having gone through COVID and kind of understanding the preparedness of dealing with a pandemic or, some sort of natural disaster. Any lessons or takeaways that you took from that?
I think we're always challenging ourselves to get better from an emergency preparedness perspective. The pandemic was a wild card that I don't think anyone could have dreamed up. Here in Florida, we're used to hurricanes. The good news is you can watch the hurricane develop, and track it all the way through the Atlantic, know that it's coming, know what time you need to hunker down, know what kind of preparations that you need. The pandemic was different. It was long-lived. The rules changed on a regular basis. Guidance changed on a regular basis. We learned, how to be much more flexible, I believe. I also think we learned how to communicate better internally. I think it was a different kind of challenge, but I would say that we are always prepared. And if anything, the pandemic proved that we are creative and flexible and that a lot of our emergency preparedness does work. We just have to continue to challenge it. And so we continue to challenge and run drills throughout the course of the year. We get real drills throughout the year as well, but we continue to simulate and model things. We're actually getting ready to. It's funny with all the cybersecurity issues and the issues over the past weekend. We're getting ready to simulate another cyber attack drill. What happens when the computers don't come on? What are we going to do? So we're getting ready to simulate that at St. Anthony's in the coming months.
Were you impacted by that at all?
We were not. We were very fortunate, very strong IT information technology team at BayCare, well prepared. And we may have had the benefit of just not being on some of those platforms that were impacted, but we really did not have any true impact.
But I think it is even if you're not, right, it is one of those things that it's a great exercise to go through to say, okay, if it did impact us, how would we respond? What's the workaround? Great exercise to go through.
Absolutely.
Sure. What I admired, Scott, is I enjoy just hearing you think through various issues. You have a great strategic mind. I've enjoyed your leadership through the Chamber Next committee at the Chamber. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and just talk about strategic planning. I think people would find some interest in it. So how do you view the strategic planning process?
First of all, strategic planning is imperative. If you're not strategic planning, if you're not looking forward, if you're doing the same thing, if you're standing still, you're going backwards. Everybody else is going forward. You have to go forward as well. So you have to look at your entire planning process. And, back to strengths of the BayCare health system, that's another one of those areas that I believe is a true strength of the health system, where we look at our planning across the entire health system. The other benefit, I would say, is looking at a multi-year plan and not looking at a single year plan. I've been in organizations where you look at a single year plan and that feels reactionary, right? So if you look at it
you're
across,
on the hamster wheel, right? You're constantly,
And so you have to look at it on a multi-year basis and look at what are those key components and what are those key metrics. What is it that you're looking to accomplish and achieve as you go forward?
Well, how do you balance kind of that long-term approach with short-term needs and flexibility?
And I think a couple of things, having that longer-term window of time, of view, some things take longer to develop. It takes a while to build a hospital,
sure,
a greenfield hospital. So you may know that's out there on the horizon. So you have to factor that in. So what's flexible? What can you accomplish in the near term? What's midterm and what's long term? How do you balance those things in between? I'll tell you, it's not as much related to strategic planning, but I believe it is a big strategy it was something that was novel to me coming to BayCare, is really looking at our financial forecasting on a forecasted basis rather than on a budgetary basis.
Okay.
Kind of moves you out of that reactionary kind of front and moves you into a longer view. And you've seen it before. Many of us have seen it before. You do a budget. You spend the fall getting ready for your big budget for the year. You get your budget all locked in. January comes and something happens, right?
Yes.
And you get a variance,
yes, yeah.
right? So you're describing that variance in January and February, and then you spend the rest of the year going back to explaining the variance in January and February. We project forward, and we only look in real time. So we'll look in real time and project out 18 months. It says, okay, something happened in January. What's the pragmatic reality of where you sit right now today? How are you going to project that forward? What are you going to do to intervene? What are you going to do to make progress? But what are you going to do as you move forward so that we don't spend our time explaining what occurred in the past, but looking forward into the future. So I would say that's just one example of one of the tools that we use to keep us forward-facing and future-facing.
I love that tool, especially I think more so than maybe since the Great Recession. I'm talking about banking, just the past couple of years with the dramatic change in interest rate and deposit costs and the Fed, intervention. I mean, it has been just to your point. I mean, both years in a row. I mean, virtually since January, like our budget was, we just throw it out.
Yeah.
So how does culture balance and is incorporated into the strategic planning process?
I'm talking about BayCare. I will tell you the culture at St. Anthony's is unique in and of itself. And if we go back to that Franciscan heritage, I will tell you that the Franciscan Sisters and their DNA is embedded into the fabric of the culture at St. Anthony's. Wow. But I'll tell you, the culture of BayCare is equally unique and a component of everything that we do. People are attracted to BayCare because of our culture. They stay because of our culture as well. And I'm mentioning culture from a strategic planning perspective because we have an extraordinary team of the future as an element of one of our strategic pillars. So our team's embedded into our strategic plan. We have to develop that team and maintain that team.
Sure.
And so it's all the way.
You can't do anything without the team.
You can't. And so even from an input standpoint, we've got, again, vertical communication channels up and down throughout the organization to help implement the plan, to help develop and implement the plan. But then the team itself becomes a component of that plan. Their well-being becomes a component of that plan as well.
So talk a little bit about the Franciscan influence, and because it sounds like we're talking about two very strong cultures that somehow, some way have been married together. So, I mean, how would you define the individual cultures? How have they come together?
I would say that Franciscan heritage is really embedded into BayCare because they were so foundational in the formation of BayCare. As you will recall, St. Anthony's is one of the Franciscan hospitals that was opened in 1931. The other one was St. Joseph's Hospital in 1934. So when St. Joe's, Morton Plant Mises, South Florida Baptist joined together to form BayCare, that was all part of the culture of the overall organization at its time of formation. And when I say there's cultural differences, I would say that each hospital has its own unique identity, but there's one overarching BayCare culture, even though there's unique identities inside of that broader culture.
Well, I will tell you, I don't know if it's intentional or not, or maybe there's a change coming in the future, but it's been interesting to see that even though they've all come under the various hospitals have come under the umbrella of BayCare, that they've kept a independent name and an independent identity. I mean, is that strategic? Is that something that's going to be phased out, or is it intentional?
It is intentional. And again, BayCare is the overarching organization that operates all of the entities, but each one of the entities came with its own identity. I'll tell you, as we move forward, future hospitals that are developed, there's BayCare Hospital Wesley Chapel.
Oh, sure.
There's BayCare Hospital Manatee that will be developed. So I think you may see a little bit more of the BayCare brand that is forward-facing, but that brand is still forward-facing on each one of the legacy properties as well.
Well, and the communities that those hospitals are in have really, they're part of the community. They've embraced. They're part of the identity. So right. I love the fact that we've had some continuity there, and people in the community feel like that's their hospital. So I mean, kudos to BayCare for seeing that. As you're looking at key indicators and evaluating your strategic planning as you go along, what do you consider? What do you look at?
Key indicators. Everything goes back to quality. And I'll say that we have a scorecard that really evaluates our performance really more on the annual basis. So, the strategic plan may be a multi-year plan that looks forward on an annual basis. And we reward our team members as well through a team award goal where there's a payout to all 32,000 team members based off of how we perform on key metrics in every individual year. Each one of those key metrics maps back to the strategic plan.
Okay.
There's a component of that.
Continuity, consistency there. Yep.
Absolutely. There's a component of that is cultural. There's a component of that is quality driven and process driven. There's a component of that is financially driven. And there's a component of it that is growth driven as well. So it really kind of maintains that continuity of balance between culture, performance, clinical excellence, and financial integrity.
No, it ties it all in. That makes a lot of sense. In terms of just the amazing technology changes we're seeing. How do you manage through that? How do you kind of adapt and change your strategic plan as there's new methods of care and new technologies are introduced? I know we talked about kind of COVID and being nimble, but how do you consider technology in that process?
I'll use an example for a department that we have inside of our information technology division, and it's an innovations department where we recognize that large organizations tend to be methodical, process-driven, analytical-driven. We'll never get there fast enough, especially if you're dealing with a large technology platform. How can we challenge ourselves to be nimble? So we essentially created an innovations team that says you have no rules. Your job is to go out, find, test, try, pilot, find out best practice, see if it works, and then if we can create a test case for it, how do we implement it? And we want to free you up from that standard kind of process. It will ultimately get through that standard process, but we want you to be nimble enough to act and react. And that's really brought some innovative technology forward, some robotics technology, and some of our integrated service center, our warehousing systems, even one that just opened at St. Joe's Hospital in their cafeteria. As odd as this sounds, it's a just walk out product, and it's in partnership with Amazon. Amazon tends to know what they're doing. And where you go in and essentially register an account, and you don't stop at a cash register. You just go grab whatever you want, and you just walk out.
Sure.
And when you walk out, it's paid for.
Yeah.
And automatically credited. You don't have to stop and do anything. So that's just an example of some of that innovative technology. We're doing it a lot on the clinical front as well as we implement and deploy. But we have to have the flexibility to be more nimble on the trial side so that we can then create the appropriate standards and go through our normal rigor and normal process to institutionalize it.
I don't know if you know how unique that is, but a lot of people have toyed with that process, but being able to go from the innovation and then the implementation, completely different skill set, completely different, I think, cultural adaptation to allow those changes to come within an organization. I mean, one of the it's a great story, if you hadn't heard it, maybe our listeners, but Xerox and the Los Alamos labs. Are you familiar with the story?
Mm-mm.
No, so they purposely created. Xerox was headquartered in New York, and so they created a lab exactly like you're talking about in Silicon Valley, and wanted it to be away from the corporate headquarters. And they effectively created the first personal computer. And of course, this is Xerox, so they're in the business of making copies.
Right.
And corporate came out and looked at it, and they said, like, there's no use for this. And
you guys are crazy.
You guys are crazy. Steve Jobs went and took a tour of it, and then took the graphic user interface and took it back to Apple. Eventually, it was disbanded, and Adobe came out of it. And I mean, there's the number of companies that came out of it, but we all could be using Xerox computers right now if the organization had the foresight to not only, they allowed them to go out and create, but didn't have the vision to execute. Right. So how do you balance that?
I think we have to challenge our teams,
especially in a high litigious world that the medical community is in.
Well, there's a difference in what we're doing at the bedside and what's actually in clinical practice versus thinking creatively. And I think we have to challenge the teams to be as creative as they can, to challenge convention, to bring that to best practice. Is there a best practice that's out there? And I'm kind of going back and forth between clinical and innovations, but we have to be free to voice those concerns, to voice new novel concepts, to challenge them, to test them, to pilot them, and have an environment back to culture that's free, that's open and warm and embracing to all of that. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. Just do it fast and get it over with, and let's back up and figure out a new way to do it.
No, I love that. So BayCare recently adopted BayCare Virtual Home, which is an interesting kind of adaptation of technology. I mean, do I have that correct?
It's the name is BayCare Virtual Hospital.
Okay.
We just piloted it. And it's just an example of, part of it is an outshoot of the pandemic where people were pursuing other avenues to care, other access points to care. I will tell you that CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has embraced a virtual hospital model where essentially this is not a model where a patient is at home receiving home care. These are inpatients that meet inpatient criteria. They're receiving an inpatient level of care. It's a different level of resource intensity, but they're receiving that care at home. So there are teams of nurses that are deployed into the field to treat those inpatients in a home environment. And I would say, part of that is an outshoot of, what we experienced in the pandemic, people looking for alternative sites of care, new ways of having that care delivered. And I would say BayCare as a health system being novel, creative, and innovative in the realm of a newly recognized space by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We've just launched that pilot in the past week or so. We'll see how that pans out, but it's in response to the consumer really looking for, I want that level of service, but I want it in an environment that's not inside of a hospital.
So this reminds me a little bit, I think it's a Geico commercial where he calls the doctor and he's like, okay, take the knife, make a 4-inch incision. We're not talking about that level of care, but some sort of like hybrid between a teledoc with some additional oversight and possibly combined with some in-home care.
With direct hands-on that are receiving care at a higher level of intensity, still direct hands-on with the caregiver, but they're able to recover in their own environment.
I've also noticed, I think the community has really appreciated that BayCare is a tremendous community partner. You provide a lot of benefits and a lot of programs and partner with some organizations. For people that don't know, can you talk a little bit about that, Scott?
Yeah, a community benefit is something that BayCare takes very seriously, St. Anthony's takes very seriously. It's an intentional effort on behalf of BayCare. And, a lot of people are not aware. We give back over $550 million in community benefit last year. And that's BayCare as a health system. St. Anthony's was over $40 million in community benefit. It was right around $45 million in community benefit. And that's a combination not only of charity care, but it's also intentionally looking at unbilled services, looking at what can we do to invest back into our communities in a way that provides benefit. And I'll give you 2 quick examples. We provide 2 nurses at Pinellas Hope. They're there at Pinellas Hope, and they're providing medical care to the residents of that homeless population, 250 that are there in the encampment on any given day. And they're doing health screens, health checks. They're preventing them from calling 911 and going to an emergency department somewhere. And that's something that we do to provide value to that particular community. And St. Anthony's funds both of those positions. Another example, just working working with the homeless population and working with our partnership with the city, we provide a nurse that goes out with the police assisting the homeless. It's one of the St. Pete Police Department's initiatives. So there's a nurse that goes out every Tuesday with a dedicated group of individuals that visit all the homeless encampments.
No kidding.
And he provides triage services, wound care services, minor medical services out there in the encampments. And those are just small examples of how we give back to our community. So, that is something that's a commitment from BayCare. We consider ourselves to be a community-owned asset. We are a community-owned organization, a community-owned resource. We have an obligation to return that value back to the community. So $550 million for BayCare last year, $45 million for St. Anthony's last year.
I've heard you talk about your mission before. How has that evolved or changed given your experience in healthcare over the last several decades?
It took me a while to find my mission, and it moved me from direct patient care. I grew up in a direct patient care role and then pivoted and transitioned to hospital administration. As that vision and that calling kind of materialized in my own mind, I realized how critical it was for our teams to understand the value that they bring every single day. What people don't fully appreciate is in healthcare, we're glad that we're here for people, but nobody wants to come see us.
Right.
Nobody wants to go to the hospital.
Right.
It's very rare. Occasionally, if you're dealing with, birth issues, you're celebrating, it's a happy time. If you're dealing with a surgical issue where you may be able to fix something, the flip side of that is we're dealing with people at early diagnosis. We're dealing with people at the midpoint of a chronic disease or illness. We're dealing with people who are at, end of life and dying. And that just creates such a crucible for those individual patients, for their families, for everything, the entire envelope that surrounds them. And it's really a sacred kind of time when you think about it from that perspective.
And life-changing and generational changing in some instances, yeah.
Exactly. And, when I kind of learned my calling, it was, what can I do to help the teams fully understand and appreciate that? That what they do is so incredibly meaningful. You've got your normal routine of your, day. You have things that you have to do. You've got checklists that you still have to do before you go home today. Mm-hmm. We all do. People get wrapped up in that in the course of their day. And if they can step back and realize the sacredness of what they're doing, the care that they're rendering to that individual patient at that moment in time, that's my mission, is to help that resonate with them, because that makes them better caregivers. It makes them better clinicians, and that creates better service to our patients in the end.
That is a differentiator. And if you're able to instill that in your team and the care providers that are directly dealing with those patients that are going through, in some instances, some of the most challenging times in their life, that's incredible. Yeah. Scott, anything else you want people to know or leave people with?
Just that St. Anthony's is privileged to be in the St. Pete community, to serve Southern Pinellas, to be part of the BayCare health system. We've been serving this community for many years. We consider it just a real opportunity. We consider it a privilege, and with that privilege comes great responsibility. For us to be good stewards of the trust that the community has given to us and continues to give to St. Anthony's and continues to provide to BayCare, and just our commitment to the broader community, to West Central Florida. I'm personally excited as to where BayCare is headed over the coming 5, 10, 15 years. I think the sky's the limit, and we are grounded by our commitment to serve our communities, and that's really what differentiates us.
Well, Scott, it is a pleasure to have you in the St. Pete market and St. Anthony's, and as well as BayCare in the greater Tampa Bay area. So thank you for all that you do. If people want to get in touch with you, where would you direct them to?
I would direct them to scott.smith@baycare.org. It's pretty easy to remember, and they can certainly catch me there.
Well, Scott Smith, it is a pleasure. Thank you so much, and appreciate you coming on Money Market.
Very good. Thank you, Owen.
If you have a question or future show idea or would like to be a sponsor, you can send us a message at moneymarket@bankoftampa.com, or find us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and on Instagram at Bank of Tampa, and online at bankoftampa.com. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you around in the Money Market.